Doctors, nurses, EMT, etc. What's the most shocking thing you've seen after thinking, nothing could surprise me anymore? Elderly guy came in the middle of winter. Legs were frozen to mid-thigh. And I mean truly, ice block frozen. At the same time, he had a bunch of serious burns all over his torso. His gas had been cut off in the middle of winter, technically illegal if the gas company has documentation of an elderly or handicapped person in the home. He had been trying to keep warm with an incandescent light bulb. He kept falling asleep, and the bulb would fall on him, walking him up and causing small, fairly deep burns. He lost his lower limbs, rewarming, and went to the burn unit. He passed within a few days. The level of suffering he must have gone through is immense. To this day, it is one of the saddest, most preventable end I've ever seen. Story 2. A patient's insurance company refused to pay for a PET scan. When the patient said they would pay for their own PET scan out of pocket, the insurance company said they would refuse to pay for any treatment, testing, or further workup based on evidence from the PET scan if she paid for it herself. It was the most petty, bullcrap, evil thing I've seen insurance do in a long time, and I see them do petty bullcrap every day. Story 3. This guy kept coming to my unit because he was aspirating on something. He had a tracheostomy and a feeding tube in his stomach, so we were confused why he was being admitted every few weeks for aspiration if he wasn't consuming food orally. We eventually learned that his sister, wife, yes, had been pouring whiskey down his trach. To top it off, he tried to grope every female nurse and tech that had him. Story 4. 20-year medic. It's actually really hard to say what's the most shocking, but I once had a guy on hallucinogens completely remove all the tissue from his left forearm, took it clear down to the radius and ulna. Dude was just chilling like everything was normal. It was crazy and definitely goes on the list. Story 5. Woman admitted to inpatient psych also complaining of pussy pain. Gyne consult did pelvic exam and found A, a rubber duck, and B, her change purse behind the duck. When I came home and told my husband, he matter-of-factly asked, well, did she squeak when she walked? Story 6. Irate psych patient went like the Terminator and got the fire hose on and went about, taking out computers, monitors. Staff was hiding under the desk as he was aiming at us. This went on for 30 minutes. He flooded the entire unit before help came. It was a locked psych unit. I worked there 20 years, one of the craziest situations of many. Story 7. Ex-emergency here. I always thought babies took time to be born. Well, that's not always the case. I was helping a woman who wasn't English speaking. She was very pregnant. And we kept trying to tell her to calm down, to breathe, but she was just screaming, and in a blink, a baby popped out into her sweatpants. We cut off her blue sweatpants, and there was a baby girl. Just like that. It just popped out. Story 8. Emergency physician. I thought I had seen it all until a few months back. I had a septic lady who I couldn't figure out the source. Admitted her, and she was a boarder in our ed overnight. Next shift, a nurse comes out of her room. Doc, I literally just caught the woman injecting something into her PICC line. Woman was injecting a slurry of her own crap into the PICC line. Yeah. Story 9. Psychiatrist here. Had a 6-year-old child with behavioral problems have a breakthrough with his therapist that he feels unloved and needs more affection from his mom. The very next day in his appointment with me, I tell his mother this. He looks at her, and she replies with, okay, and goes back to playing on her phone. As a father, that broke my heart into a million little pieces. I've seen psychopaths, but a mother ignoring her child's cry for affection in front of me? This is how we create monsters. Story 10. I once had a patient years ago who I believe was homeless. He was found unresponsive, laying in a dirt pile with an unknown downtime. He kept complaining of ear pain. Come to find out he had maggots in his ears. Story 11. Mine's a little different since I work on a med-surg unit, but I'll never forget the way my heart ached when we had to admit an old lady from a nursing home who had extreme bruising that had nothing to do with her reason for admission. We suspected something was going on at the nursing home and was indirectly confirmed when we caught the nursing home staff sneaking up on the unit to take pics of her. Story 12. I was security at a hospital. Guy was driving down the highway and caught a round to the temple. He was rolled in, just chilling, looking through his phone like nothing had happened to him. That's not the most ducked up, but it surprised me how he seemed unfazed. Story 13. Had a patient who was scheduled for bowel obstruction surgery climb out of her intensive care unit bed in the middle of the night. In the time it took us to race across the unit to help her, she was already squatting and screaming. She passed the biggest ball of feces that was pure evil. She looked like she had been through hell, but said she felt better. Obstruction surgery canceled. Rectal repair immediately. The charting on that one was wild. Vitals stabilized though, so it was a good night. Story 14. Probably a psychotic male shoving both hands inside of him and smearing feces in his own eyes. He was one of the sickest patients I have ever cared for as a psychiatrist. Story 15. An adult male patient was brought into the ER by his brother because he didn't seem right. Was just sitting in his recliner watching television but not doing much else and with minimal interaction with others. But conscious, able to ambulate without issue, etc. Radiologist read the CT and said, "Well, that's probably because he's got a bullet inside of him." Sure enough, upon further examination, he'd been shot. Random gunfire. He passed away shortly thereafter. Story 16. Day off on vacation with another paramedic. On the highway, saw an accident happening in the distance. We were in the funnel to get by. No PD, fire, or EMS. On scene, and it was bad. So we stopped to help. This was early days of cell phones, but we had one and called it in. I should have known by the smell what was going on when I opened my car door. Diesel, exhaust. I will never forget that smell. Internal organs have their own special smell, and if lavender was in that mix, lavender would repulse me for the rest of my life. DPS report said a pickup truck at 80 miles per hour blew a tire and went into oncoming lanes and hit an 18-wheeler at the pinch point, driving the 18-wheeler into the lanes of traffic the first truck originated from. This caused a head-on collision with a family car at about 120 mile per hour combined impact. And the impacts from the vehicles that couldn't stop drove the family car under the cab of the 18-wheeler. The vehicles were so badly mangled, you couldn't tell it was a pickup. Triage is a system where you look at the injuries and decide who is going to get help. 5 fatalities. 18. Wheeler driver had to be life-flighted to trauma. 3 others transported to her with serious but not life-threatening injuries. Hour and a half later, we were still trying to get the cab off the family car with a high crane type wrecker, even though I had already given up hope of anybody being alive relatives of the family car. Had passed the accident but didn't see the car, as it was crushed under the cab of the 18-wheeler and was unrecognizable. Returned to the scene when their loved ones they were behind weren't at home. DPS fire, EMs and wreckers had been on scene for a while. My friend and I had taken a back seat to rescue efforts by this time, and had cleaned up and were leaving as we would only be in the way at this point, when the family approached us to ask about the details. The other 4 fatalities. Ton of bricks, just as vivid as the day it happened. Story 17. First code, death I saw was an elderly woman vomiting. She had had a stroke several years back, and her doctors thought she was silently aspirating and was diagnosed with a pneumonia, but also constipation so bad it caused a bowel obstruction. Stool had backed up so far that it was causing reflux, which she also had been slowly, silently aspirating, and after a slow deterioration, she puked up all this old and pass. When we did post-mortem care and rolled her to clean her and change her sheets, more poop vomit that had been in the back of her throat kept dribbling out. Story 18. Man covered head to toe in splinters. Not like the tiny slivers you work out with tweezers. Looked like he just came off set from a horror movie. Just large pieces of wood up and down his body. Doesn't know what happened, said he heard a sound like a gunshot and was suddenly in pain. Apparently it got cold enough that the sap in a tree froze and the whole thing just exploded while he was walking to work that morning. Story 19. Our ICU had both a woman whose ex had attacked her by trying to make her drink bleach and the ex, who tried to hit himself afterwards by drinking the rest of the bleach. I took some satisfaction in seeing how much worse off he was. Story 20. Extremely elderly woman put in an empty bathtub naked so her family could clean her off because she was incontinent. Left there for days. Emaciated, huge open wounds, horrible pain. She lived a couple of days. We called the police. Story 21. We had a lovely, devoted lady who visited her barely conscious elderly parent for a long time. She came to see them every 72 hours. She was stealing the medicines out of the patient's patch and taking it. We only found out after she collapsed a few times and had to be revived. Really sad, she stopped visiting when the patch stopped being used. Story 22. A sheet of paper, front and bad, 2 columns each side. List of allergies and intolerances that a woman brought to the hospital with her. Laminated. Included things like saline and plastic bags, wet newspaper, toilet paper, and tons of meds. Story 23. I had an older man who had a first-time seizure. They discovered a cancer. He was in a different city with neurosurgeons who are excellent. I know the group because I worked with someone who trained there. They were set to operate. Insurance called and denied coverage. His insurance was a Medicare plan that was via a secondary that was hospital-based. They demanded the patient have surgery at that hospital. Cheaper. The insurance had him drive to that hospital. He had no one and drove himself to the other city. The insurance company risked everything because money. Now granted, the guy himself did the driving. But again, he has a cancer, so maybe not pinnacle decision-making. But he shouldn't have been allowed to drive. Hospitals and insurance companies should not own each other. Story 24. I'm a firefighter that does a lot of animal rescues. Saw a pit bull jump off a 4-story roof and land on the concrete driveway. The dog was totally fine and ran up to us wagging his tail like it was game. Not a single injury. The fall must have been at least 40 feet. Why is it that when I misstep off a curb, I'm out for a week? Story 25. The thing that shocked me the most after working in an ER wasn't trauma. It was how awful people are and how often body fluids solids are used against you when you're trying to help them. Story 26. We once had this really old, frail woman in our care who got a skin infection on her foot that just started getting worse and worse. It was becoming necrotic, so there were two options. Either she lost it but run the risk of hit her in surgery because she's that frail and old, or we do nothing but just keep cleaning it, elevating it, and bandaging it up in the hope that maybe it will get better. It was a moral dilemma that only the family could choose. End in comfort now, or later at the expense of constant pain. Her family were so damn stupid and oblivious to her needs. They treated her as if she were still in her prime, despite the fact she couldn't swallow whole foods anymore. They'd give her solid foods and act shocked when she began choking, and then would need to be rescued. Of course, they decided to not go through with the surgery for their mom, just to squeeze out another month or two of life from her. The most in denial, deluded family I've ever witnessed. Yes, it's sad when our parents die, but I would never prolong their suffering just because I'd feel sad when they eventually go. And no amount of painkillers could truly make her not feel the cleaning process. We repeated this process every few days. I held her hand as this nonverbal woman would just scream as it was cleaned. Everyone in my area cheered when she passed. It's bittersweet being so happy and relieved for her end, because it meant she was finally at peace. Story 27. One of the psychologists on our team was called in to deal with a new and distressed patient who'd been admitted and put in the tranquil room to calm down. While in there, he found a pen cap and poked hundreds of holes in the one wall that was drywall and crap on the floor, and used his hands to play dough factory crap into each hole. The room had to be closed for 2 months to fully clean up and rebuild the wall. Story 28. I was a medic in rural Nevada. Got a call for an old-timer who took a spill in a casino parking lot. Not major, but had a decent laceration on his forehead. I'm getting him patched up when there is a knock on the ambulance window. Probably a friend or relative, I think. Nope. I open the door of an ambulance covered in old man blood, and this entitled idiot tells me I'm blocking her car. Story 29. I was a nursing student a few years back. During clinicals, I saw a lot. In 1 week, I saw one of my patients lose a bit more of his. A colostomy bag seal failure that started draining into an open wound bed. I will never forget the smell. A guy with jaundice that was so bad that I thought he stepped straight out of The Simpsons and was bitten by no less than 2 separate dementia patients. I didn't stay in the program very long, but I will never forget my time working in the hospital. Story 30. Exercise physiologist in a rehab clinic for heart and lung patients, many recovering from heart surgery. I've seen people not heed mine or the doctor's strict warnings to not do anything that could reopen the healing chest scar from then being quite literally opened up. But I had a patient whose inclusion site was raised in a bubbly-looking way when I was giving them a physical assessment. I mentioned that I don't like the look of it and told them to see the cardiologist ASAP as well. As I messaged their cardiologist and PCP personally to explain the situation, both docs gave them the okay to come back and exercise. Well, it popped while on a rec bike from, I'm guessing, pressure buildup of fluid because milky puss leaking out. Another one a few weeks after that was a patient who I later found out was septic, having a 170 heart rate, and was so delirious he fought me verbally and physically, got a good punch to the center of my chest and face. When I called for an ambulance and refused to have him drive home, he drove to the clinic. I'm so happy he didn't cause an accident, and I walked around with a nice black eye for a bit. Luckily, I made a fun spin on it by telling patients a resistance band did it to me because I didn't follow proper safety precautions with them. Story 31. Dear Doc, the most shocking things I've seen are things that would make you hate humanity and haunt my nightmares. But here's a few fun stories. 1. When I was early in my EMS career, got a sick person call. Lady used to be 500 pounds and hadn't been able to get up from her couch in a few weeks. Don't know how she was alive, but she was barely. Fused to the couch fabric by her own excrement and skin oil. Sweat. 2. As a med student, saw at least 2 people put on involuntary psych holds because no one cared to verify that English wasn't their first language. I found one because I went to round on the psychotic man found wandering a parking lot. Realized he wasn't speaking gibberish, just Korean, fully oriented, and was wandering that parking lot looking for someone to help him with his flat tire. 3. As an intern, first year of training to be an ER doc, finished coding a morbidly obese lady. Rolled her once we called it to do a back exam. Found one of her pet cats underneath her. Unknown told for the cat. 4. Had a man who touched a very high voltage live wire. Had 100% burns down. Smelled like burnt BBQ. 5. Had a lady show up altered, not moving her legs, and an EKG showing a heart attack. MS told me she did a bunch of substances. 6. Had a mentally normal 16-year-old swallow a bunch of magnets and give himself a bowel obstruction. Came in for right lower quadrant pain with normal ultrasound. Mari was down that day. So we got a CT scan to look for appendicitis, because he never thought to tell anyone. Lucky MRI was getting maintenance at that time. Story 32. This was from my medical school trauma rotation. Guy was riding the side of a garbage truck, called his wife at 6 p.m. to ask her what was for dinner and if she wanted him to just bring home takeout on his way back to the house after he got off his shift. Ended with, "I love you." The next call was from us in the trauma bay at about 8 p.m. The garbage truck rolled over with him riding the side. He was hit and passed away. The first thing she said was, "But he just called me about bringing home dinner." It was the moment that changed my view of mortality. Here 1 minute, done the next. Story 33. My brother is a volunteer firefighter, and they got called to the local addict house for a possible overdose. A police officer had arrived before they did, and one of the other residents of the addict house freaked out and thought the cop was there to arrest her. Her solution? Climb under the roof of the 2-story house and fly away. She did get to fly, though, in a medevac helicopter. Story 34. Warning burn victim. I was a medic on an MT truck. A dude had taken a motorcycle engine apart and put the parts in a tub of gasoline in his shed for cleaning in the middle of summer. Sometime in the middle of the night, he put on an army parka. The only thing he was wearing lit a smoke and decided to go take a look. By the time we showed up, he was still standing in the burning ruins of his exploded shed. Everything not covered by the parka had 3-degree burns, including his head, just standing in the middle of the flames. Story 35. I've seen an incredible amount of things stuck inside of people. They always fell on it. One patient with Munchausen's who pretended to fall off a roof and land on a 5-inch screw. He literally used a drill to put a screw inside. But the one that got me was Spatula Man. I'm working one afternoon and we get paged out for a patient that called 911 for pain in an extremity. I respond, and my partner and I find an older gentleman sitting on the porch. He's maybe 50, doesn't appear to be in distress. He says he called 911 and that he's the patient. My partner starts asking him what's going on. I start visually assessing this guy and see nothing wrong at all. Chaox 4 doesn't appear to be in tremendous pain. He's chatting comfortably with my partner and just lets us know that he'd like to go to the hospital and he can show us the problem once he gets in the rig. As he rises from the chair, I notice he's not very ambulatory. And there's a pretty bad smell from this guy despite his tidy appearance. At this point, we are both suspicious because nothing matches up. And we both look at each other thinking this is yet another ass-spelunking adventure. But we load him up, we close the doors, and he just goes for it. He slides off his pants. You know those kitchen spatulas with a hole in the handle for hanging on a wall peg or whatever? He had inserted himself, flaccid, into the handle of a 8-inch spatula. The hole in this handle looks to be about 1.5 centimeters wide. I don't even know how he fitted in there. His balls are bright red. The guy, who just revealed something I can never unsee, is still chatting with us like everything here is perfectly normal. But I've lost all sense of duty, and I'm just sitting there on the bench seat staring at this dude's junk like I've unwrapped a golden ticket in a Willy Wonka bar. See, getting it stuck there isn't really the shocking part. The shocking part is that the vast majority of his extremity post spatula is damn black. I still can't even form words, but my partner immediately asks how long ago this happened, and he said it's been stuck like this for the last 4 days. He said he and his wife were experimenting and stuck it in there, but that it had started swelling up and he started panicking when it wouldn't return to flaccid. He said he attempted to cut the spatula off, but had been worried and stopped. But he was too embarrassed to ask anyone for help, so he thought he'd wait it out. I cannot imagine the amount of pain he endured rather than ask for help. Needless to say, he lost most of his extremity to this. I still don't know what he was doing with this spatula. I don't know how his pride somehow overcame the amount of pain he had to experience during that time. Story 36. Older female being horribly neglected by her husband, caretaker. This older lady in her 70s fell down early summer, and we had a crew go out there, go check on her. She was alert and able to make her own choices. She refused his care and decided to stay on the floor. A few months go by and we get called out there again. We walk into the small home and instantly smell human crap. She's still on the floor on the same side with a blanket covering her. We lift the blanket and she only has a shirt on, is covered in crap and piss with open, clearly infected wounds. She is able to grunt to pain and nothing else. There is weeks worth of crap in this tiny room she is in. Her husband is behind us yelling, "I can't do this anymore," and other crap. We call for help in PD and attempt to move this woman. We struggle to move her as she has been laying in the same spot for so long that she has been fused into the carpet floor by all of her bodily fluids. We rip her off the floor like a Band-Aid, which makes more wounds, and carry her outside. Her poopy legs rubbed against my pants, and my partner got some form of fluids on him that ate through his pants. It literally looked like someone threw acid on this dude's crotch. PD has us on body cam throwing up. We transport her, and she passed 3 days later. PD decides not to pursue charges on her husband because he was too old. Story 37. Just last week, there was a patient who kept putting things up inside so he could get pain medicine. He stuck styrofoam from a cup, rolled up paper, medication, silverware, and change. Probably more things too. Story 38. Took care of a guy with frostbite to all 10 toes. He was high on meth and walked 15 miles barefoot in the snow in a northwestern state. I'm an RN, and they told me to let him know he was going to lose all 10 toes. I felt bad, but did my job. He acted like it was nothing and just kept on making out with his girlfriend. I think he was still on met because they were climbing all over each other while I was trying to do wound care. I finally told her she couldn't sit in his lap anymore while I worked. I couldn't believe they were acting that way anyways. I was just shocked that he was losing all 10 toes and he would be toeless and be fine with it. It was just weird. He was also in his early 30s. Story 39. A 4-inch centipede coming out of body of in late stage, totally incapacitated female Parkinson patient. In a nursing home. I dropped her meal tray and just cried. I was 30 years ago as a nurse's aide, and it haunts me still. Jack Kevorkian is my hero since then. She lived another 4 years like that. So wrong. Story 40. A teen who was wheelchair-bound but basically neglected to hell. Left in their own feces for such a long time that their bottom half became a giant infection. The stench was so bad. Makes me question whether or not we as a species are worthwhile. Like a big asteroid should come and burn us all up. Let the dolphins have free reign of the planet. Story 41. Floated to the emergency, and I can think of 2 that was new for me. First one was a 20-something years old schizophrenic patient that believed his junk was causing him to sin, making him want to lost it. The previous hospital attempted a Foley, and it came out the other side, and the smell is something I don't think I could ever forget. Second one was a Met man who attempted to remove his balls. Story 42. I work in acute rehabilitation, so not as crazy as an ear, but I have a few. First was an elderly woman, clearly not taken care of at home. Her toenails were so long that they curled completely under like those goats with the curly horns. No idea why none of this was addressed during her acute hospitalization. Impossible that no one noticed, and they should have reported the family for negligence, but didn't, so we had to. Patient on for cardiac rehab after a cabbie dropped in the bathroom and we did CPR. We sent him 911 back to the hospital he had his surgery in, and he returned to us after surgery and did great and was discharged home. These 2 are more emotional than gory, but the first is a patient who had a TBI who was very mobile after but cognitively impaired. He was also very aggressive and mean, which was not his baseline at all. His wife was a nurse and was great during all our teaching sessions. Day of DCPT kept saying she wasn't coming, and we reassured him she was. Hours went by and she didn't, so we called and no response. We sent police for a wellness check and found her in the tub after taking a bottle of pills and an entire bottle of wine. She survived and admitted she felt like a failure being a nurse, but unable to emotionally deal with the significant cognitive and emotional changes her husband had. He went to a nursing home while she was in the hospital, and I'm not sure if he ever went back home. The second is a patient with Parkinson's who was end stage. His family had been withholding info from the outpatient neurologist about his decline, telling her it wasn't as bad as it was. I think it was part embarrassment. He had become aggressive and hallucinating a lot, and part they wanted him at home and not a SNF, even though he was more than they could handle. His wife had just been released from the hospital and came in with their daughter for a visit. He became aggressive and swung at his daughter, and his wife moved back to avoid getting hit and fell and broke her wrist. She passed a few days later from a multitude of pre-existing conditions and complications. We discharged him and he passed a week later in a nursing home. Story 43. Last winter during a really cold spell, coupled with snow, I had a resident in the locked memory care I work decide that the building was on fire. 2 a.m., he took a suitcase from his closet and threw it through the window in his room. He had a roommate who slept in a bed directly under the window. Suitcase guy crawled over his sleeping roommate and out the window to the firehouse down the road to get help. They called the police because they thought a homeless man was hallucinating. Knock shift didn't notice any of this until roommate came out much later and said he needed another blanket because he was so cold and it was snowing on him. They checked, and sure enough, his bed was covered in glass and all helpful. Harry was gone. It was a crap show. Story 44. First of all, you learn really fast to never say never working in healthcare. No matter how many years you do it, you will always see something for the first time, at the very least, once every few months or so. That being said, there are still other things that shock me or creep me out no matter how many times I see them. The total lack of care for another's life. How people treat elderly family members is definitely on the list. I'll never forget a relatively young, think late teens or early 20, man who had shoved the rubber gripper of a pen up inside of him because he couldn't pee. Story 45. The saddest was a dementia patient I had. The last 8 weeks she was alive, she would just cry and say the same phrase over and over. Turns out that the phrase was one of the worst days of her life. The woman was reliving her worst day ever on repeat every 15 minutes over and over and over, just bawling. And not that normal sort of crying, but that hit you in the gut. Their pain is so evident with their cry type of cry. I've never wanted euthanasia to be a thing more than I did for that woman. Story 46. Medicare, like a lot of others on here, it's hard to really narrow it down. At a point, shocking becomes the norm and the boring becomes the agonizing. However, one particularly bad black cloud of a month, where I was having a code on every shift and my partners thought I was cursed. We got a call for an O in the Wawa parking lot. We got there first before PD or the engine, and me and this equally smallish woman dragged this dude from his car where he was crumpled up and not breathing no goods. He just looked at us for a moment before letting out the most hellish scream ever. And then from inside the car, another scream happened as a clump of blankets in the passenger seat became alive as well, where his buddy had been out. He started fighting us and his buddy crawl over to grab my partner, and luckily a jump truck showed up with my two burly fire bros, and they started to pull the passenger off my partner's ass as we fought with the first one. My partner managed to pin the driver down, and I ran to our truck to get Verst unlocked, and I just remember my hands shaking as I tried to undo both the locks and draw it up. I got back out and tried to bring the calmness, but he proceeded to beat the crap out of the two of us, and the fire guys were also struggling with their guy, one of them getting dragged through the mulch by the time I hit my emergency button. We got all the cops, another medic units, an engine, and it was still like fighting. The Verst was not working, and it took 8 per person to tie them down on the stretcher, and even that was not working well. We decided on diesel instead, and ended up at 2 different hospitals, where it took everyone to get our guy in. He ended up with a vec drip and intubated in the ICU, as did his buddy. What is messed up is that is like the 3rd case in many years of that happening. Just psychosis, or some substances that we don't know what is. One of the ICU docs told me they think substances at one point, but I don't know if the kids are still doing Calvin Klein these days. Anyways, when I pass that Wawa now, I get a little bit like the gif of the dog with the cupcakes. Story 47. Not shocking so much as an interesting surprise. Called to a car fire, and by time we got there, it had spread to a van next to it. Car was essentially gone, and van was a shell. Everything in it burnt, except a pair of Timberland boots. Gave them a wipe down, and somehow they were still in one piece and wearable. Also at that job, standing in bay next to a car fire burning at almost 1,000 degrees, I look up and see a bystander in a yellow hoodie just toddling straight towards us through thick black smoke, looking through his phone and filming. Had to turn the hose on him to get him to back up. My dude, I'm safely standing next to the fire because I'm wearing thousands of pounds worth of kit designed for this exact purpose. I can't say the same for you. Story 48. It was something I heard from a patient's son. I was working as a hospice doctor, and occasionally we have cases where someone decides that they no longer want to be on dialysis, and they come into the hospice center for end-of-life care. It's actually a very pleasant way to die, and if I could choose, it's probably the way I would go. Anyway, most people have about a week to 10 days, and when I came onto the case, she had already been there for a few weeks. After a week, I decided to do some blood work on her, and it turned out that her kidney function was almost normal. Somehow, her kidneys had recovered while she was on dialysis. This was, of course, great news, and we started working on her discharge and where she would go since she had sold her house and everything had been moved months before. We were looking at assisted living options for her and found a very nice place. While I was checking on her the next day, her son was in the room talking to her, and I overheard him saying, "But this place is very expensive, and if you move there, you'll use up all the money you've been saving for me." Apparently, her not dying was interfering with the plans he had made for his inheritance. Story 49. And cousin works in air. I recall a story along the lines of, "Nothing can surprise me anymore." What's that smell? Cheese. A full wheel of it. Patient was presenting with a very severe yeast infection. They took off her pants and it just splat onto the floor with a smell that could make Chernobyl habitable by comparison. I don't know what's worse, the fact she said that was not the worst thing she saw, or having to enter with a hazmat team to clean it up. Story 50. Ex-EMT. We got toned out one night to a parking lot by PD for a fight. When we got there, you could tell it was a good one by the way the officers looked at us. 2 sisters had gotten in a fight over a boy, and one of them took away her. Story 51. I can see anything. It's the smells that get me. We had a homeless guy who was a bad diabetic come in during the middle of winter. He was suffering from frostbite, but refused to take off his boots for several weeks. He lost his knee. That smell. I've witnessed Gift of Life bully multiple families into organ donation while denying last requests for one final embrace before being wheeled back. I watched a teenage girl pass on the table. She and her mother went out to get fruit, and some gang members thought the car belonged to a rival. I'll never forget the scream from the mother after being told we lost her daughter. It was the sound of a heart being broken. Medical examiners are absolute ass, and take pleasure in making your job harder. They already know the answers to the questions they're asking. I lost a former NFL player who accidentally hit himself when the gun in his bag went off in a dealership after he dropped the bag in the floor. The only reason he held on as long as he did is because he was in prime shape and trying to get another tryout. The smell of copper from all the blood on the floor remained in the room for hours. I'd finally had enough of this when a surgeon I've worked with for years called me a damn idiot for handing him the wrong instrument. Story 52. Kind of related. I worked in a pathology lab. If you don't know, a path lab is where all the gross stuff. It's a world of wonder. So one day, a severe diabetic lost his leg. The experienced PA who was dissecting the leg, as normal, all of a sudden stepped back in terror and exclaimed, "Damn!" And then he dry heaved. Story 53. Not a nurse, but my brother dated one. She assisted in a case where a homeless guy had been wearing jeans. And when they wore out, he just put a new pair on over the top of them, and then again later. So he had 3 pairs of jeans on. Never took them off, never bathed unless he jumped in a lake or whatever, and his leg hairs had grown through all 3 sets. So they had to surgically remove them. Story 54. I was a paramedic, and the town I was working in was usually like -5 in winter. But we had a cold snap down to around -20 for 2 weeks. It hit the homeless population hard. Towards the end of the cold snap, I got called from his social worker to pick him up. Guy was horribly cold, he said. Can't walk anymore. Think I got frostbite, boss. I check him out and he stinks something awful, but yeah, no motion or feeling in his legs. I keep his socks on for now because it's cold. Get him inside the bus and the smell is atrocious. He's wearing coveralls, so I start taking them off. I see crap and ask him if he crap himself. He says, "Yeah, I haven't been able to walk for the last 5 days, so I've just been crapting in my overalls." The things are cut open now, and it's awful. There's a stucco spray of crap about 70 centimeters in diameter around his ass, and the Mat Fuji in the center is like 15 centimeters tall. It smells so awful, my driver is barfing out the window on the way to the hospital. I cut off his socks and try to clean him up a bit before we get there. Still haven't thrown up because I'm a damn pro. Hospital knows he's coming and has already set up a room with nebulized fragrant oils, and the nurses all have scented oil painted under their noses. This is the lamest ending ever. But the ER staff did applaud me for putting up with that smell on the way to the hospital. My partner has a coffee ready and told me to sit down while he cleans because he can't understand how I didn't barf. Patient lost both legs and ended up in a wheelchair. Story 55. Nurse here. Once in the ER in rural Australia, I spent a whole shift looking after a man who'd been attacked with a machete. Story went, there was a guy fellow on the run from the police who jumped a fence into his backyard. The man had just shot up some met and thought that the guy in his backyard represented a threat to his 3-year-old daughter. So he grabbed a machete and went out and whacked this other guy in the head with it. The guy reaches up, hit with machete, and starts going to town on the Met Man. Met Man ends up with hundreds of deep lacerations all over his body. Yet somehow, he made it to hospital conscious and okay. Guy ended up waiting for an air ambulance about 6 hours, then got lifted out. Story 56. Burn patient who'd been admitted to our COVID unit. No RESP symptoms, but required COVID precautions, so he landed on our unit. Was burned due to blowback from the accelerant he used to try and burn his dad's house down with his dad inside of it. He had undiagnosed mental illness, which had been progressing for years, and his wealthy family bought off local law enforcement to cover up his issues. Up to this point, he had been semi-functional, in the sense that he would hold down a job until his paranoia started to bleed over, and then he'd quit before they could fire him for inappropriate behavior or absences. Rinse, repeat. He'd been issuing threats of an abuse to his family members for years. Story 57. Not medical staff or anything, but I was a prison boss for way too long, and my last job with the state was at the prison wing of a public hospital. Stoma with gonorrhea. Same guy. Stoma guy came in several times also because he kept hiding foreign objects and said stoma. Swallowed razor blades were, at bare minimum, a weekly thing. Object lost inside of him. Wasn't major contraband, so sent back to unit. Came back a few hours later with a pencil up inside. He used to try to get the original whatever out. Lots of mental health injuries. Story 58. I'm an ICU nurse. The things I find most horrible now aren't probably what most people look for. It's human behavior. Anyone that does what we do will know. I don't see some of the things paramedics see, like young families pass on roadways, but I see people torture their elders way past expiration dates. But here are some of the more grisly, shocking things I've seen. Story 59. Working COVID IQ and people coming in still thinking pandemic was make-believe, refusing to be tested for pandemic because it was a liberal lie. We would then place them in pandemic ICU. Since we couldn't be sure that they were pandemic negative, they would be surrounded by people who quite honestly were most likely going to die, intubated, from pandemic. A lot of them, shortly after arriving, would quietly suddenly agree to being tested. It was infuriating and discouraging to see so many people so deep into Fox News that they wouldn't listen to anything else until they were already in the unit. I used to think zombie movies weren't realistic because people couldn't be that dumb. But now I think they aren't realistic because half the population would be screaming, "How dare you try to keep the zombies from biting me?" Doctors of Reddit, what is the how the heck did that happen to you case you've seen? Story 1. Work in the ed as a medical student. Had a guy the other day who let a leg infection get worse for years, and when he finally came in, his infected leg was at least 4 times the size of the other one, and was draining copious amounts of foul-smelling pus. If the infection had been seen earlier, he would have just needed antibiotics. Because he waited so long, he's going to lose the leg, if not his life. Story 2. Working in the ER, we had some interesting ones, but the simplest and most intriguing one I've had was a man came in complaining about chest and side pains. After a few tests to rule out heart issues, we discovered through an x-ray that the man had 19 fractures throughout his rib cage. When I asked him if he had been doing anything dangerous, he replied with, "Nope, just dancing." Needless to say, I'd recommend not trying to do leaping flops into the worm on repeat on concrete, which is the only way I can fathom this occurring. And no, he didn't explain what kind of dancing. Story 3. Nurse here. Had a patient who scratched her eye with her nail and waited over a week to get care for it when it was clearly infected. Sore, swollen, red, irritated, pus. It looked so bad. She lost it. Story 4. We saw the same person come through emergency for facial burns 3 times in 6 weeks because they couldn't grasp the concept of not smoking while on oxygen. Story 5. My mother-in-law is a paramedic who this year attended a scene where an older person has suffered a heart attack and passed away in their home, leaving 2 cute little poodles alone in the house. You know what dogs eat. Story 6. The witching hour was upon us, and a man came in, looking in some discomfort. He had a delicate issue in his nether regions. He was very embarrassed, so off we went to a cubicle where he told us that he had fashioned himself a not-made-for-purpose junk ring out of a large metal nut. Unfortunately, there was no Venus return possible, and his junk had become swollen and painful. He hoped it might subside, but then it started turning blue. By the time we saw it, it was extremely swollen and turning black. If he thought he was saving himself embarrassment by waiting, he thought again when we called the fire brigade to bring their large cutting instruments to free his strangulated buddy. The urologist said may suffer functional problems in the future. Story 7. Not a doctor, but former psychiatric nurse. I've seen all manner of weird and wonderful things yet. The most perplexing was a young girl we nursed in PICU with history of pica when we took her for x-rays. Due to her complaining her stomach was hurting, we found a belt buckle, a full-size spoon and butter knife, as well as an assortment of batteries. As far as I recall, as it was some time ago now, they had to operate immediately to remove. And again, if I recall correctly, it was the batteries they were most concerned about, as if one exploded, started leaking. It would have caused irreparable damage. I have never seen a set of x-rays like it, and seeing was believing. Incredible how the hell she managed to get them in there, but never underestimate the willpower of psychosis. Story 8. So not a doctor, but a medical technician. This definitely isn't as graphic as some of the other stories, but the interesting thing is that it happened yesterday. We had a patient who was on a ladder. I believe he was trying to change a light bulb and fell off the ladder. He broke every single one of his ribs and gave himself a hemothorax. He was rather young too, 40. Story 9. Work in a burn center. For 3 months in a row, we had 3 different people come in because they tried to end their lives by setting themselves on fire with gasoline. I cannot imagine what brings someone to that point to think that's a good way to go out. Story 10. Victim is a powerlifter with a home gym, tries to squat too much weight, and on the upward push, herniates his sphincter. Story 11. I have an amazing "how damn did that happen to you" story. End of nursing school, did a rotation, internship in the large urban hospital. Get a call that the helo is bringing in a 17-year-old with a severe spinal injury. Call in the specialty surgeons and they get to work on this kid. He has C3 through C5 fractures from a diving injury. Docs work on him for hours with very little hope that he will regain anything below the neck. Once the surgery is over, we are all exhausted, but the surgeon wants to see what will happen if we wake him up. With respiratory standing by, we bring him out of anesthesia. He starts breathing on his own. He opens his eyes and responds to his name. Awesome. For some reason, I was near his hand. I saw a small movement. I said nothing. I grabbed his hand and squeezed. He squeezed me back. Crap. Mind you, I'm just a nursing student, but I yelled the surgeon's name and said he just squeezed my hand. Surgeon called bullcrap until he saw the kid raise his arm. The entire was silent. This kid should have been a quad for life, but by some miracle he was moving. The feeling of seeing that kid's arm move something that I will never forget. I tried to keep track of his progress, but the last I heard, he was killing it at physical therapy and had regained almost total control of his upper body. Story 12. My ex, Bill, was doing his residency at the county hospital in Chicago. A homeless woman came in suffering from a bad infection. While examining her, he did a gynecological exam. He was studying to be a gynecologist. He noticed something inside of her, reached in, pulled out a few dollars in paper money, at which point she started screaming at him to give it back, which he did. She'd hide her money in her pussy for safekeeping. So yeah, you don't know where that dollar in your pocket has been. Story 13. My mother is an emergency nurse. And a while back, a 90-year-old woman came in the department complaining of pain in her leg below the knee. After an examination, my mother suggested an X-ray. X-ray comes back, and it turns out the leg had been broken several months prior, snapped clean across both the tibia and fibula, and she had somehow ignored what must have been excruciating pain and continued about her life. And then the bones had healed, but not straight. Story 14. I'm not a doc, but a medical technician, still in college, but you see some crap nevertheless. There was a guy who had a car accident damaging his cervical spine. Our hospital surgeon did an amazing job, so after a long process of recovery, the man was able to walk using only a cane. Another problem he had was some neurologic muscle illness, not sure if myasthenia gravis or something else, which made it hard for him to do any fine motor movements. Although he had all these health issues, the guy insisted that he is independent, so he did all of his daily activities on his own. The problem occurred when he went to his beach house on a vacation and went to take a bath. He lied into the tub and turned the water on. Then he turned on the hot water and realized that the faucet isn't the same as he had back at home, and because of his motor skills being bad, he didn't manage to turn the hot water off. Result? 3-degree burns. Story 15. Dr. Friend told me of a man with a flower stalk stuck up his junk. He was trying to give his girlfriend a birthday surprise. Unfortunately, flower stalks have little angled hairs on them, which make them easy to push in, but impossible to take out. Story 16. Nurse here. Had a patient come in due to pain in her chest 4 months after having a mastectomy. When we changed her dressings, the site was so infected. She passed a week later. Still don't know why she didn't come in earlier. Story 17. An old lady from church went to the doctor after her neck had been madly sore for a while, and it turned out that it had been broken for weeks. No idea how she managed to survive that. Story 18. More of a, how did you let this get this bad and not come in sooner? Patient came in Friday at 12:30. It's always Friday afternoon when they come in. Because why wouldn't you come in during the week before the busy Friday rush? Because suddenly you realize you don't want to go the weekend with something happening. So he comes into my clinic saying his eye is hurting. It's been hurting for a few months. Feels like pressure on the right side behind his eye. And he's had a headache on that side that has been worsening. His vision is also worse than it used to be, and things seem dimmer. My staff member remembered what happened a few months ago with a similar situation. Turned out to be angle closure glaucoma that needed surgery, like 2 weeks ago. So she comes to me and asks me if I can see this guy because he's in pain and scared and doesn't want to wait the entire weekend to be seen somewhere else on Monday. Okay, sure. I take him back and we go through everything. Vision is reduced. He's seeing distortions in letters, but everything looks fine from the outside. I dilate his eyes and take a look in his right eye. Right smack in the middle of his central vision is a huge, elevated white lesion. We take some pictures and scans. I had to sit down with him and have a hard talk. Why did you wait so long? This has been going on for 4 months now. He's got history with cancer from a few years ago. I had to tell him it's very likely a choroidal melanoma. I sent him off to a specialist. Story 19. This was years ago. I was near the end of my shift and a patient came in. I can't remember what the triage said, but it would have been something along the lines of self-inflicted laceration to neck. He was put in a room behind a curtain and several of my bosses, all senior docs with like 20 years experience, were coming out of the room with the same look on their faces, sort of like shell-shocked horror. We work in the emergency department, so these people see ducked-up crap on a weekly basis, and they all just looked odd. So I was like, right, I need to see this. So I put on a pair of gloves and went in like I was being useful. I wasn't. There was a young guy sitting on the bed with blood running down. I was thinking, what's the big deal? Obviously, he's hit his neck across, but it's not that bad. I asked him why he did it, and he said it was the right thing to do. I don't think he was on substances. I think he had mental health problems, though. I don't know what happened to him because I went home after that, but I assume he would have gone to surgery and then the psych ward. Story 20. Not a doctor or nurse, but I'm an MT and I've worked in an ER. An elderly man was brought in from home, dementia, Alzheimer's, and a bunch of other things as well, so he's bedridden. The stench when he was brought in was terrible. So I grabbed my trusty mini tub of Vicks Vapor Rub, sneezy done under my nose, and go to help clean this guy up and see what's going on. While cleaning him, we realize he's coated in dried, hardened feces. Story 21. Not a doctor, post-surgical nurse, had a guy with necrotizing fasciitis. Had a wound vac that kept leaking. I had to change it, was not pretty. By the end of it, we were both traumatized. I'll never forget the agony that poor guy had to go through. But on a good note, he healed up eventually. Story 22. My neighbor was an ex-emergency room nurse. Whenever we would ask her about strange cases, most answers were, "You don't want to know." The only story I have is really strange. One day, a morbidly obese woman rolls into the emergency room. Her legs couldn't support her weight anymore, and complains about mild stomach pain. After letting several people with mild ailments get treated before her, she sits up and rolls to the staff-only water cooler behind the counter. My neighbor tells her about how the cooler is only for staff, and she starts to go away. Midway, she stops, and from under her skirt, a baby falls on the floor. Apparently, this woman was pregnant and didn't notice because of her weight. How the heck didn't she feel giving the excruciating pain of giving birth? What the heck? Story 23. Lady with very poorly controlled diabetes and morbidly obese came in via Ed with a gaping hole on her thigh. Her blood levels were rock bottom. It transpires she'd accidentally hit herself when trying to wriggle into jeans. Meantime, the wound just kept getting bigger and bigger, and she attempted to just sort it by packing the wound with socks. Single worst thing I've seen. Story 24. Not a doctor, but a nurse. When I was still training, we had a woman come in the ER complaining of abdominal pain. After an x-ray, they figured out what was wrong and the story came out. She pleasured herself with glass pop bottle and somehow lost it up there and then just forgot about it. That was a few days prior to her visit to the ER. Story 25. 70-years-old guy came into the VA clinic for a bad cough and admitted due to temp of 104 degrees. He was mine, and I found lumps on his neck on exam. He had tuberculosis, scrofula. So why does he have TB in the US? We do HIV test, and he's been with some escorts. He also developed some other complications and was finally discharged after 4 weeks. Poor guy got a cough from sex. Story 26. This occurred in Georgia. A woman called up the hospital and told the ER nurse, "I've got leaves inside of me." "I'm sorry, did you say that you had leaves inside?" "Yes, I have leaves in my pussy." "What kind of leaves?" "I don't know, green ones." "Have you tried to brush them out?" "They are up in there." So the nurse has the woman come into the ER to be seen by a doctor. She comes in, the doctor looks at the problem, and the woman is sent into surgery for an emergency hysterectomy. Someone was taught to use a potato slice as birth control, but then forgot to remove the slice after having sex. Warm, dark, damp space is the perfect place to grow a potato plant, which is exactly why this woman had leaves in her pussy. Story 27. Mother-in-law was a doctor. We asked her this one day. 99% of the time, she wouldn't tell you anything. She was a good doctor. Privilege, etc. One day we got her drunk, that is. She had like 2 sips of wine and lost her crap. Loose lips sink ships. But all she'd tell us was one day the son of a huge celebrity, she wouldn't give any hints at all as to who, came in, and he was something like 8 years old, and he had a crazy hard weird spot on his leg. There was a scar over top. Kid couldn't or wouldn't give any explanation except it hurt, and the celebrity wanted it taken care of right now. She was a great doctor and accompanied them to the ER cause that's where you go for insanity, not your family doc. It was a dinky car inside, one or whatever healed over. Story 28. Just last week, I had a guy over 400 pounds. He was a hoarder and kept getting cellulitis in his legs because his house was so cluttered, he kept hitting his legs into things and getting cuts and infections. When he came in, we had to remove his socks with scissors because he hadn't taken them off in over 3 months. His socks and his skin and somehow become one. I didn't learn in medical school how that happens. Story 29. I used to work in supported living, mental health residential care. I once had a lady insert a large pair of kitchen scissors inside, luckily handles first, one Friday morning. I had the weekend off, so when I got back in on Monday night, she confessed and told me that they'd been there for 4 days and were starting to hurt. When we got to emergency, they dismissed it at first due to her learning difficulties. But after x-rays, we got sent to have them pulled out with forceps. She complained that the doctors and nurses weren't very nice about the whole thing. Story 30. This doesn't quite meet the how did this happen part, but still hits the what the duck part. My cousin is a doctor, and she once had this 300 pounds lady who came in with a horribly smelly skin rash. After some initial inspection, they found a Twinkie under one of her skin folds. It turns out she and her boyfriend play a game where she would hide various snacks in her body, and her boyfriend would have to find it. The game in question was 2 months prior to her hospital visit. I guess she won the game. Story 31. This is disgusting, and you guys will like it. Disclaimer. I'm not a doctor, I'm a paramedic. My first week on my internship, we responded to a fairly rural gas station for a male patient complaining of an altered level of consciousness. When we arrived on scene, the patient was sitting in a chair in the dining area of the gas station. I introduced myself to the patient and was crouched on the floor in front of him trying to get him to answer my questions. But he wasn't really giving me much. I looked down and noticed a small white worm making its way across the floor. I thought, well, crap. "Sir," I said, "I'm going to remove your shoe." And I did. As I did so, a cascade of maggots tumbled onto the floor. The patient was completely unable to tell me about his medical history or how his foot had come to be a buffet for corpse fauna. I double-bagged his shoe, along with several dozen maggots, because I didn't know what else to do with it. His blood sugar was fine, and he didn't appear to have a history of diabetes, and he had full sensation in the parts of his feet that weren't being chewed on. I still wonder about that guy. The only thing the patient was able to tell me was that he lived 2 states away and thought he was still in that state. The most alarming thing to me about the whole situation was that he had gotten in his truck and driven 2 states over with no memory of doing so. Story 32. Had a lady in the emergency who had a sex toy inside. She was extremely embarrassed, but came to the department for removal. We took an x-ray, she had pooped it out and didn't even feel it come out, got a bill and mortified. Story 33. Doctors were surprised when little third grader me was brought in with a hit spleen. I tripped and fell off of an 8-foot bridge into a creek on my dad's property, and a rather large rock caught my fall, hitting my ribcage just right. My dad thought I was just being a pussy and told me to sleep it off. But 8 hours later, my mom found out. They were divorced and rushed me to the hospital. Thankfully, spleens are very good at regenerating, and I made a full recovery with some physical therapy. Story 34. My mill told me the story of a lady that had come in complaining of abdominal pain and smelling absolutely foul. Turns out she had tried using a potato as a sex toy and was able to get it full inserted inside but couldn't pull it out. So she decided to leave it in there with the hopes that it would work its way out. It sprouted inside of her and then eventually started to rot. They had to surgically remove it. Story 35. Patient, a farmer, needed complete bed rest. He convinced me that he would rest at home, so was discharged. Admitted 2 days later with a hit foot. His explanation? A beast stood on it. He meant a cow. Story 36. Male patient came into the ED with chief complaint of foreign body. X-rays had showed a martini glass with an orange inside. His wife came in, hysterical, saying, "I can't believe he's doing this stuff again." Story 37. The guy had, unsuccessfully, tried to hit his wife with the machete and later regretted it, so he hit himself with it. He held it with his hand, sharp side front, and gave himself a whack perfectly in the middle. Story 38. Obligatory, not a doctor, but I am a nurse. And this was literally a case of, we have no idea what the heck is wrong with you. Ayerk. It was a long time ago, and I was never this patient's nurse. I just heard about it through the Avine at the nursing station. A healthy and relatively young man was brought in by MS because he was found unconscious in his home by a friend. He lived alone, and so no one had any idea how long he was out for. He was revived and brought into the hospital and was admitted to my unit, other than his creatine kinase levels being through the roof for those not in the know. If you're stuck and don't move for a long time, the muscles at the pressure points will break down, causing rhabdomyolysis. Every test kept coming back normal. The doctors put him through every test they could think of, tons of blood work, CT scans, MIRIS, ultrasounds, etc. But everything kept coming back normal. The patient's vital signs and condition stabilized after a few days too, and his SAC levels steadily decreased. He ended up returning to normal, and he was discharged without ever finding out exactly what had happened to him. Story 39. A very tame example, but here's one mom, an ex-nurse told me. One day a patient came in who had basically no social interaction whatsoever. So he looked like a complete mess, with hair nearly down to his hips. As the nurses cleaned him up, they noticed his hair was quite thick around his head, and they couldn't cut through it. Turned out the guy had been wearing a beanie for the last 10 years, and his hair had just grown through it and over it. Story 40. So many, not a doctor, but a nurse practitioner in the ER. Toy car inside, giant pill bottle inside. The best is probably the guy who was being a good Samaritan and picking up the garbage bag in his neighbor's driveway, and sure enough, a needle slipped out and got lodged. Our surgeon called him on his bullcrap, which was hilarious. Story 41. Not a doctor, but a paramedic told me this one. Got a call to a house where a teenage boy had suffered a junk injury. Remember those glass-stirring rods from science class? Kid took one home and put it down inside. Shudder. Story 42. Not a doctor, but my grandpa was a heart surgeon and also an ear doc for a while. He told me this story about his time in the ear, so I was there in the office. When a man came in with a look of absolute pain, I asked was wrong, and he said it would be better discussed in private. It turned out that he caught his junk on his zipper. All I could do was give a good yank. Cue me cringing at the thought of that, and Grandpa with a big-ass grin on his face. Story 43. Training as an EMT, so not a doctor, but in the OR. Old guy shuffles in with his girlfriend, both mid-50s. He is holding a members-only jacket in front of his junk and wobbling in. We take him through triage to the back and get him on the exam table. His junk was the size of a large watermelon. It hung below his knees and was easily 18 in diameter. Serious hernia issue. I think every physician in the hospital came down to consult on it. I mean everyone. Cardiologists, ENTs, etc. Everyone made an excuse to come take a look. This was clearly an issue he had been avoiding for years. They were going to transport him to a nearby hospital for the treatment, but because it was across state lines, he refused to go. So he slid off the table, pulled his jeans up around his junk, grabbed his jacket and his girlfriend, and shuffled off to the bus stop. It's an image you never forgot. Closest thing I can relate it to is when Hugh Jackman is trying to carry the fishbowl between his legs in The Prestige. Story 44. I work in the operating room and have a former life in trauma. I've seen many things I wish I hadn't. Worked in a case where an elderly gentleman lost a humongous sweet potato inside of him. Had to do surgery. Most memorable was talking to him pre-op and him just saying over and over, "I can't stay overnight, my wife can't find out." Word from someone who's been woken up more times in the night than I would like to admit. If you are going to put something inside that was not specifically designed to go there, think twice. Weigh how much pleasure you might get out of it against what it would be like to have to describe to multiple people why you had to go to the ear. Had a newly married couple come in very embarrassed. They were vacationing and fooling around on their honeymoon and lost their sex toy in the husband. Not too uncommon, except this thing was huge and still on. You could feel the vibration if you touched his pelvic bone, which every resident in the hospital proceeded to come in and do. Story 45. Doctor. Multiple, incredibly advanced. Morbidly obese man comes through Ed. So large, he had to have 2 bariatric beds pushed together. He wasn't to be my patient, but he had a lot of anxiety and embarrassment with female doctors. For some reason, we just had a connection. I really felt like he just needed to talk. Talked about his situation, home life, all of it. He had this calm and peace about him despite his health. He passed away 2 days later. At first, it was hard to comprehend how life would come to that, yet in the end, I understood. I'm sorry, man. I wish things had been better. Story 46. This story was told to me by a doctor. A 38-year-old man came in complaining of terrible headaches. The doctor ordered an MRE and found a steak knife blade embedded in the guy's head. Apparently, the guy had been in a bar fight 20 years before and had been stabbed, but didn't realize he'd had a knife blade inside of him for 20 years. Story 47. Hospice nurse. Live in Texas. Had a male patient in his mid-40s passing from several things. Wasn't feeling well in his stomach area, so he went to the doctor. Blood tests showed cancer. His family literally consulted a witch doctor, something involving reading chicken bones, that said it was not cancer, but instead voodoo or some crap in his gallbladder. She said the gallbladder had to go. They couldn't get a doctor to remove his gallbladder when the hospital tests didn't show anything wrong there, but good news was the witch doctor lady knew someone in Juarez. So they went to Juarez, where some doctor took out his gallbladder and fixed him up and sent him home with some painkillers. A week later, he wound up in the ER where he had emergency surgery to repair all the damage. Hadn't been given any antibiotics from the doctor in Mexico. So the surgeons in Texas try their best, but he essentially wound up with a big stage 4 pressure ulcer on his abdomen. That's when we get him on hospice. It went on for about a week of the feces leaking and all that. No surgeon would touch him due to the terminal cancer and less than 30-day life expectancy. The patient and family didn't really understand hospice when they signed on. I don't think because they still wanted us to fix him. Last I saw them was at the ER where they took him, despite us saying it would cause us to have to drop him. Insurance won't pay hospice and hospitals stay simultaneously. They called their attending, who then called a surgeon to look into it. We all talked to the patient and family and tried to explain things. They looked in the eye of probably 100 years of education and experience between us, and insisted it wasn't cancer and he just needed a surgery to fix the hole. By the time I left, the surgeon, probably 30 years experience, said it was the worst case of medical malpractice he had seen in his career. He equated it to the horror stories you read about in textbooks. Story 48. Back in 1972, I worked in Ed and had a boy with his old brother. Big brother tried to help little brother zip his pants up, but alas, his junk got zipped up in the zipper. Little guy was beyond crying and big brother was feeling real bad about it. It still makes me cringe. Story 49. I've heard surgeons refer to the trauma unit as relentlessly working directly against natural selection. Use your imagination. They've seen a lot of Darwin Award candidates. Story 50. Not a doctor, but a witness to something. My family went to Disney World a few years ago, and we met up with some family friends. On the Space Mountain ride, the husband raised his hands. His wedding ring got caught on something above him and lost his finger almost completely. It was hanging by a piece of skin. Thankfully, he got into the air soon enough to save his finger, but he can't move it and doesn't have feeling in it. Story 51. This was about 10 years ago when I was a pediatrics resident. I had a patient from a juvenile detention center admitted for sudden inability to walk or stand. He started peeing brown, and it was found he had rhabdomyolysis that was threatening to shut down his kidneys. He had no idea how this happened and claimed he woke up and suddenly couldn't use his legs. The second night of his admission, his mom and sister came to visit. His mom left, but his sister stayed the night in his room. The next morning, I go to his room on rounds to discover this dude ducking his sister in his hospital bed. Keep in mind, this is a children's hospital with butterflies on the walls and little kids being pulled in wagons by their parents down the hallways. Needless to say, all hell broke loose and the truth came out. This sister was actually his girlfriend who was implicated in his weapons and substances charges and who he was forbidden by the court to have contact with. The cops came and dragged her away while she screamed and cussed us all out. Stunned parents of other patients looked on in horror. The guy's rhabdo eventually cleared and he didn't need to go on dialysis. He started to regain strength in his legs. Before discharge, he finally admitted what triggered the muscle breakdown and his leg weakness. He did 1,000 leg squats, all to get released from juvie and see his girlfriend. I presented the case at morning report the next day and called it the sore shank redemption. Story 52. Not a doctor, but a nurse. During my surgery clinical, we get an obese gentleman in for hernia surgery. The gentleman stands with his walker to transfer to the surgery table, gets put under, and Doc lifts the gown. This guy's balls were as big as a beach ball. It took 6 hands to move his sack around to get him prepped for surgery. Doc removed 7 pounds of abdominal fat, pushed some of the omentum and a loop of gut back up into abdomen. The doc doing the procedure was hilarious. At one point, he handed me a large bowl of freshly removed fat and told, "Here, Miss Student Nurse, it's like Play-Doh." He also mused about whether he could bill insurance for junk enlargement. Story 53. Not the doctor, the patient. When I was about 13, I can't remember what caused it, but my uvula, the dangly thing at the back of the mouth, got stretched. Maybe some food got caught on it on the way down my throat. It was only stretched a little, but it was definitely longer. Being the naive youngling I was, I put my fingers in my mouth and started playing with it out of curiosity, which stretched it even more. At midday, it was at the point where I could comfortably fit it between a gap in my teeth. Anyway, the day goes on, and I'm finishing up at school. I text my parents, who are picking me up, and tell them that my tonsils are run. Help! They arrive in school, thinking it was just a prank I was pulling. But when they see me, they start to panic. At this point, my uvula stretches down from the back of my throat, out my mouth, to my chin. They rush me to the hospital. The doctor takes a look at it and has no idea what the hell it is. He recommends some paracetamol. My uvula didn't hurt. I felt no pain whatsoever. I get home and my mom starts treating it as its palates and makes me gargle and spit salt water. They were worried that I'd choke on it in my sleep, but when I woke up, it had shrunken considerably. This was about 10 years ago. It's still a fair bit longer than it should be. When I close my mouth, I can comfortably rest it on my tongue. And I've looked it up, and some people on YouTube have had the exact same thing. It completely perplexed the hospital, though. Story 54. Not happened to me, but to a friend of mine who works as a nurse in the emergency department. A young Turkish woman came to the hospital and had pain inside where something was stuck in. So my friend and her colleagues started to check and were completely baffled. There was a soap dispenser upside down inside with the opening facing downwards. The dispenser thingy had been removed. It needed to be cut out because the bottle had been grown together with the walls inside. Turns out this thing was stuck inside her over half a year, and parts of said walls were growing inside the opening. My friend also said it was the worst smell she ever witnessed, since months' body fluids had gathered on top of the bottle. They assumed that the patient couldn't remove it herself due to vacuum and was too afraid or embarrassed to come to the hospital earlier. Story 55. Story from back when I was a junior emergency doctor. At my institution, male catheters, P-tubes to drain the bladder, are only to be inserted by doctors. 30-years-old dude comes in claiming to be in a lot of pain because he hasn't peed in a day. Nurse tells him she'll get the young female doctor, me, to insert a catheter straight away. I enter the room and the story changes. This guy now looks embarrassed AF and tells me he lied at triage, and the actual reason he's here is because he's got a couple of balls stuck up inside. He tells me it's been there for days and he can't get them out. I order a couple of scans to see if I can visualize these beads, but unfortunately can't see them. Radiologist tells me this doesn't mean they're not up there. Sometimes balls the same density as poop, so the next step is to try to pull them out blind. I glove up and have a good feel around. I can't for the life of me find the string that these balls are attached to. Being a small female with short fingers, I really lean into it. I feel in all directions, but alas, no balls. I give up and call the bum surgeons, thinking maybe they'll put him to sleep and look in with a scope. To my surprise, they're very familiar with this guy's name. Apparently, he's a frequent flyer. Comes into emergency all the time, with imaginary foreign objects, requesting bum exams. There is nothing in his bum. I consider nominating him for an Oscar for the award-winning performance. Story 56. Not a doctor, but work in an ER. It's not really how the heck, but more of a why the heck 2 stories. 1. Young guy, early 30s, type 2 diabetic since he was in his teens. He, to put it bluntly, didn't give a crap that he was diabetic, and since then has lost both legs from diabetic foot infections. Gone blind from diabetic retinopathy and is in end-stage renal disease and is on dialysis. He's in here like every day for DK because, surprise, he doesn't use his insulin properly. 2. Young girl went to Florida for what is called a Brazilian butt lift. Well, whatever sketchy doc did this gave this poor girl 3rd-degree full-thickness burns on a section of her abdomen and a similarly sized section of her back. As if that was not bad enough. To add insult to already pretty significant injury, the post-op center she went to apparently told her it was bruising. Anyway, 3 weeks later, when she's back in Canada, she shows up in her, and the smell is, well, bad. I was lucky and missed when she initially came in and only spoke to her after her wounds were cleaned. The worst of the smell was gone. The note from the debriding involved the words liquefied necrotic fat, and pretty much no one wanted to eat meat for the rest of the day. Story 57. Still a third-year med student, but my dad is a psychiatrist who used to work for the Center for Victims of Torture. I knew it was a really bad day as a kid when he came home and just sat watching us, crying. Doctors of Reddit, what was your "this person is obviously ducking, lying, or faking" moment? Story 1. Patient came in with seizures, nonspecific weakness, lightheadedness, and numbness, tingling in her hands and feet. She gets admitted because of some electrolyte issues, not related to the neurosymptoms. These were corrected later and symptoms persisted. Sure enough, on the second day, she seizes. As soon as the diazepam is pushed, before the flush is even in, she stops seizing. This happens again 3 hours later. The third time, while she was seizing, we took her hand and tried to drop it on her face twice. Both times, she moved her hand out of the way so it wouldn't smack herself in the face. We just stood there until she got tired of shaking. It took about 5 minutes. She left AMA a few hours later. Story 2. Emergency here. Had a patient start seizing in front of the cops after they were pulled over for possible drunk driving. We get there, and patient is still on and off seizing. We get them on the stretcher and in the back of the ambulance. Surprisingly, the cop joins us. As I take their arm, the shakes start up again, so I tell them, "Yo, if you want this medication, I need you to stop so I can start an IV real quick." Patient stops to let me start the line, and once I say I'm done, they start back up. Story 3. Funniest story of my medical school career. We were rounding on the wards for a teenage son whose parents were in the room. Dad, we saw our son tested positive for substances. This is clearly incorrect. Attending, there are some false positives, but the test is pretty accurate. Dad, my son is a lifeguard. He would never smoke. Son, yeah, I've never ever smoked. Looking scared of attending. We can order a more sensitive test that will give a more accurate answer. Son, well, I do sit really high up on the lifeguard chair, and I think some of the kids around the pool smoke. So maybe I breathed in some of the smoke while working. Asterisk, asterisk, team. Asterisk, asterisk, frantically ends conversation to leave the room and laugh hysterically. Story 4. Patient comes in saying she has terrible abdominal pain 10. I say, okay, and start to examine her. She immediately starts screaming the moment I touch her belly. But look, I've seen patients in terrible pain, and nobody has ever yelled in pain with their eyes open. She wasn't even tensing or anything. It was a really sad case, though. She has a history of coming in saying she was pregnant when the urine and blood test was clearly negative. In one case, she even tried to steal a pregnant patient's urine. She got caught pretty fast. She was on psych follow-up. Not sure what the diagnosis was, but my guess would have been Munchausen's. Anyway, we sent her home without pain meds. My second patient was a man with a chronic cough. Asked him, "Are you smoking?" And he says no. Examines him, and there's a cigarette pack right in his breast pocket. Story 5. Not mine, but my mother's. An ear doc at the time. Scruffy guy, mid-50, comes in looking for non-specific help. Confused, smelly, dressed in ragged, mismatched thrift store suit. Clearly homeless and just looking for a bed. Keeps muttering something about quantum, obviously a little off his rocker. Mom decides, might as well give him a workup and teach the residents. Turns out the guy's in near-total renal failure, so they give him dialysis. Snaps too. Suddenly coherent. Suddenly sane. Suddenly talking about real, actual quantum physics. Turns out he's a math professor. Some organ problem sent him into a mental tailspin on his way to a conference a month earlier. Got off train in wrong city. Been wandering the streets ever since. Missing and presumed pass. They're not always faking. Story 6. An ex of mine told me a story about a dude that had a window wiper handle stuck up inside because he had one laying in the shower, slipped and fell onto it. It never occurred to her that it might have not been an accident. Story 7. Doc, do you need to refill your meds? PT. Nope. Still taking them. I am asking because I know based off of my prescription that it is time for you to get more. If you don't need more, it means you aren't taking them. Story 8. Obligatory. Not a doctor post, but when I was a child, I remember my doctor asking me about my diet. And I, as an overweight, unhealthy child, responded with the names of vegetables and fruits. That's that we both knew I didn't eat. Story 9. I'm a therapist, but I do diagnosing if that counts. I had a woman in my office claiming she had multiple personalities. It is kind of a sticky diagnosis to begin with, but she was claiming that she could talk to different personalities and then bring them out if she needed to. All of this seemed like it could potentially be more of a psychotic disorder or attention-seeking. Then she introduced me to her girlfriend, who also had multiple personalities, which they started naming, most of which were based on candy or Disney princesses. Notably, the bad one was called the Beast. I actually asked her if she had seen the movie Split during out session. She said it was a coincidence. Story 10. Vet student here, used to work as a technician near a major university as I went through undergrad before getting accepted into vet school. The amount of animals, mainly dogs, Who would come in with college students on the weekends after ingesting substances or alcohol the students left out is higher than I would have expected. But the owners won't tell us the animal got into a drug stash because they don't want to get in trouble, even though we know that's what happened because of the side effects the dog is experiencing. But we need the confirmation from the owner. Just tell us. Making up a story or saying something else happened isn't helping you or your pet, especially in life-threatening situations. In order to properly treat the substance's toxicity, we need to know what it is. I promise you, we aren't interested in getting you in trouble. We're interested in saving your pet. Help us do so and be honest when you visit the doc or vet. Story 11. I'm a dentist. We have a drug tracking program shared with any narcotic prescriber that tells me what patients have filled out what. I just need their name and DOB. I get drug seekers every now and then with real or fake pain claiming they haven't been taking anything. Quick search shows me the truth. Most people don't know I can do this. Liar, liar, pants on fire. Story 12. I'm an emergency, if that counts. So here's a good one. About 85% of the calls we receive, at least in my town, are issues where they clearly aren't severely injured. And just think, if I call 911, I'll get into the hospital faster. Pro tip, you still wait like everybody else unless you're actually pass. Another part of this percentage of people are ones that just want attention, medication. We had a woman recently that decided that she was going to have a seizure in the ambulance. A real seizure, put simply, usually looks like they're just tensing up and twitching in one position. This lady was flailing every part of her body everywhere and trying to spit everywhere. Not only was it clearly fake, but we had to clean up the damn mess she made. We'd usually let it slide, but I pulled out a nasal airway and a lube packet and said loudly to my partner, "We need to stabilize her breathing. I'll put in the airway in a second. Just let me apply the lube so it doesn't hit her nose like it usually does." The instant I said it, she stopped having her seizure. Unrelated story. But we also had another woman that claimed she couldn't get up after a fall in her house. We arrived to her entire house being locked, so we called through a window that was cracked to see if there was any other way inside besides breaking through her screen. She proceeds to stand up, go to the front door, unlock the door, walk back to where she was, and lay back down. We did a generic checkup, and there was clearly nothing wrong. When she said she didn't want to go to the hospital and we were about to leave, she stopped us and asked us to call Comcast for her, since we are the EMs and are a higher priority. Story 13. Not a doctor, but I am a patient who lied. Before my sobriety, I did some doctor shopping. After that got hip, I'd have to go around to urgent cares and stuff. I ended up needing something badly, so went to my doc. I've been going to him for years. Like since I was 18 years old. I told him I was sober and had tooth pain and back pain and other pains and had tried everything. Against what he was supposed to do, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Both of us know what you're saying right now is complete horse crap." Turns out my doctor was in AA. I ended up leaving after crying for 30 minutes. Got sober within the next 6 months. He goes to my home group and is still my doctor. Story 14. Not a faking story, but the exact opposite. A friend was complaining about serious stomach pain and had all sorts of feelings of being sick. Lightheaded, sweating, kind of groggy. I didn't have any painkillers in the house at the time, but did have cough syrup with acetaminophen. Figured it'd work as a short-term solution. Cough syrup is pretty benign, right? The moment she drank it, she started screaming from pain. Not quite the result I expected. Took her to the ER. She got checked in, and we ended up dealing with an ear doc who was incredibly combative from the start. Simple questions are met with short, snarky remarks. There are looks of disdain. She's in a ton of pain, and at one point my friend starts saying she thinks she's having a heart attack. They hook her up to an EKG, say, "Yeah, she's fine, nothing to worry about," and act like she's an idiot for even thinking she's having a heart attack. The doctor literally talked down to her like a child, chastising her for thinking she was under cardiac arrest. I'm a former medical animator. Totally not a doctor, but I used to specialize in products that treated anxiety and depression. I helped create Lunch and Learns, which literally taught doctors how medications worked, what the side effects are, how they interacted, etc. I picked up stupid amounts of knowledge at the time. Knowing how pill interactions worked and medical side effects was my entire job. You pick up a lot of knowledge when surrounded by doctors and chemists day in, day out. And the entire time I'm thinking, okay, it's not a heart attack, but everything she's experiencing seems to clearly point to a panic attack. She's in a lot of pain and is scared as hell. Seems obvious. They don't even consider that route. They continue being rude, snippy, and talk down to us like we're kids the entire time we're there. Cut to a few days later, my friend goes to her regular doctor to follow up, and her regular doctor is hesitant to see her. Why? The ear doctor tracked down her general practitioner and sent a letter stating he believed she was faking her pain and went to the ear seeking substances and literally sent a warning. He believed she was just an addict looking for a quick fix. She tries to dispute it, but the doctor's not having any of it. Yep, the doctor, who was giving us snarky answers the entire time, thought we were addict looking to score. Suddenly, the way we were being treated made total sense now. Know what it was in the end? The birth control pill was everywhere at the time. You couldn't escape the marketing for it at the time, and ultimately ended up making huge controversies because of massive, often fatal side effects. The doctor never bothered to ask if she was on birth control. Seems like a basic question you'd ask a female patient, no? And thus didn't bother to check the side effects of said drug. Guess what side effects is known for? Severe stomach and abdominal pain, sweating, confusion, shortness of breath, dizziness. Literally everything she was experiencing was one of side effects. Instead of doing his due diligence as a doctor, he chose to accuse us of being addicts and ultimately ducked up the relationship between my friend and her doctor. They royally screwed her over and wasted our time. That hospital treated us like dirt and then went above and beyond to screw over a patient because one doctor made the wrong call. He completely ruined the relationship between her and her regular doctor simply because he assumed we were faking it for substances. Story 15. Not me, but a friend of mine is a doctor, and he told me about a patient who came to the hospital because he had 3 carrots in his a-hole, and his explanation was that he wanted to warm his carrots before eating them. Story 16. Not a doctor, but a hearing aid dispenser in private practice. Had a patient come in for a hearing test. Young guy in his mid-20s, which is already unusual. Main issue is that he's getting noise complaints about his music. And no issues with his ears physically, so I do the hearing test. Basically ends up with a profound hearing loss. Weird, because that's basically sign language territory there. I walk behind him and ask him what his plans are for the evening, to which he responds appropriately. Definitely what we call a non-organic hearing loss. He was trying to get the results he wanted to justify being a banana of a neighbor. Story 17. 3-year-old having tonsil surgery. I run through my usual pre-op evaluation, history, and physical. Parents ensure that she hasn't had anything to eat or drink since the night before. Get her back to the OR, drift her off to sleep, and when I go to place the breathing tube, she vomits, basically solid, completely undigested scrambled eggs and aspirates. Surgery is canceled. We take her to the ICU. Parents obviously damn fed her breakfast less right before they came in. Confront the parents and they basically say they thought we were just being too mean not letting her eat for 8 hours. There's a reason we ask you not to eat for a period of time before surgery. It is not because we just like being bananas. Listen to us, please. Story 18. I've tested the hearing of a few kids pretending to be deaf in one ear. All you do is turn on your microphone and talk in the deaf ear at a quiet level and ask them a question about something they care about. Like young boys, for example, always fall for it when you ask them, what video games do you play? At 20 decibels. Works every time. Story 19. I have PCOS and endometriosis. So sometimes I'm in horrible abdominal pain. I get horrible pelvic cramping. If it gets too bad, meaning if my prescription Motrin doesn't work, I get sent to the ER. Every time I'm treated like an addict and my pain is brushed off. Nowhere doctors ever believe that my pain is real. Story 20. Sorry for not a doctor, but my friend is a big-time addict and heard if you go into the doctor with the right symptoms, you can get a script for Percocet. So he goes in and complains of a shooting pain in his balls and really tries to sell it. I think the doctor must have seen through his bullcrap, so he gave him a script for 5 of the lowest strength Percocet you can get. With the copay and cost of the prescription, he could have gotten better for cheaper off the street. On a related note, I convinced him to go see a therapist about his issues, and he either lied his ass off about his serious addiction history, or has the worst therapist in existence because he came out of it with a regular script for Adderall. Story 21. My ex worked at a hospital. Guy came in with a bullet wound in his leg, but said he fell down and insisted he didn't get shot. They took the bullet out of him, showed it to him, and he said he fell on the bullet. Story 22. I was getting the rundown on a patient once, and the nurse said something about back pain and C4. Okay, he has some injury to his neck and it hurts. Nothing special. Then I talked to the guy and nope. He claimed someone had wired the explosive C4 into his back and won. It hurt, too. He was afraid it would explode. I don't know why he thought lying about explosives in his spine would be more believable than saying he was moving a couch or something. But whatever. Story 23. Had this alcoholic patient who has been in and out of the hospital for so long because of his liver problems. Every time you talk to them about stopping to drink, he says, I swear, doc, I stopped drinking. Keep telling him that's not what his health results look like, but still, he keeps insisting. Can't call a patient a liar. So when he got better, I discharged him and wrote specifically what amount, types of alcohol in bold that he should stop. Story 24. Her nurse, not doctor, and not exactly faking it, but had an unconscious woman brought it by paramedics with blood alcohol level well over 2. She'd been found passed out on the floor by the parents of the toddlers she had been hired to watch. They were terribly worried about her, so the staff explained that she was unconscious because of her high blood alcohol level. They asked completely seriously what would cause that because she doesn't drink. Story 25. My dad is an optometrist, eye doctor, and things like this are surprisingly common. A parent walks in with child, usually middle or elementary school. This one was 8. The parent walks in saying something along the lines of, X complains about not being able to see the board. So my dad brings them in the exam room and asks the child, does anyone you know have glasses? Kid answers, well, A, B, and C do yellow flag, because the kid mentions them by name and seems like it's a social thing. My dad uses a machine called a phoropter, which has a bunch of lenses in it of the different magnifications. Don't have the exact model, but the link below gives the general idea of what it looks like. Usually, the first thing he does is swap 0.0x and 1.0x magnification. Ask typical, which is clearer, 1 or 2. Kid answer, the number that corresponds with 0.0x mag lens repeats about 5 more times. Red flag 1. Dad brings out trial frames with 0.0x lenses. The child puts them on and starts exclaiming how it's so much clearer, while my dad is just whispering to the parent how that those literally have no effect on his vision. The sad thing is, this happens around twice a month. Story 26. So my mom is a doctor. She told me this story of a woman who came in and said she had been having seizures, and as a result, she couldn't move her arms. So my mom tested her arms and tried to push it and see if she would react. The woman kept resisting and trying to keep her arm in place, and she couldn't move it. My mom had to control herself from laughing and told the woman that she needed to relax. She then left the room and discharged the patient. Story 27. I'm not a doctor, but this happened to me as a patient. I went to the doctor to get an excuse paper for work, but I smoked a blunt before going. When she took my heart rate, she started asking me questions like, do you have a known heart problem? How many coffee did you take before coming in? Did you take substances this morning? As I was embarrassed, I told her I smoked before and I feel really stressed about it. She laughs and tells me I'm going to get an ECG as they had students that day. I laid down for a good 30 minutes with a bunch of 5 nurses plugging me everywhere on my chest, knowing that I was high AF. Story 28. Not a doctor, though I did once stay at a Holiday Inn. I used to work at the checkout desk for a medical group. One time I was checking in a patient who was in a wheelchair. She was a teenager or early 20s and sat in the wheelchair completely zoned out. As the patient and her mother approached the front desk, the patient fell right out the wheelchair and started having a seizure. I had never seen anyone have a seizure before and immediately ran down the hallway yelling for a nurse or doctor. Her doctor came out from another room to see what all the commotion is and was attending to the patient on the floor in less than a minute, I would say. The first thing the doctor did was shine a pen light into the patient's eye, and the doctor instantly exclaimed, "She's faking it." The doctor recomposed herself and walked away, leaving the head nurse to manage the situation. I was told that the doctor was able to determine she was faking a seizure because her eyes didn't dilate under the bright light, if I recall correctly. That was a long time ago. Story 29. Not a doctor, but a patient. It was in 3rd grade. I was in the soccer unit in gym class. Damn soccer. Went to the nurse's office, and at the time I was a damn idiot, I said, that I had a headache in my leg and that I had to sit out. She looked at me with such disappointment and sadness. I will never forget that "get the duck out of my office" face that she made at me. Story 30. Not a doctor, but a worker in the medical field. Our patients come in 3 days a week for treatment, for about 4 hours at a time. One patient would always need to go to the bathroom about 5 times every time they were in the middle of treatment. To make a long story short, she wasn't using the restroom. She was doing substances in the bathroom multiple times a day during her treatment, which would very quickly be dialyzed out of her system and withdrawals would set in. I always had suspicion that is what she was doing, but when she eventually passed in the clinic and her reports came back positive for substances is when we all knew for sure. Story 31. Glucose, 300. I ate a carrot as breakfast. Yes, you did. This is a 48 years old, female obese patient, incredibly adherent to treatment, but would never leave her pastries and chocolate bread on breakfast. Never in the semester, I knew her. She was close to control levels, but never in her, so she simply dismissed the advices. One day, she was having her monthly control and was clearly uncomfortable and trying to leave. The reasons became obvious later. I took her sample and was there when doctor checked the results and told this lie. He was not really happy when she admitted having a nice ham sandwich with brewed chocolate that morning. Might have translated that wrong. Story 32. Her doctor had the worst person in the world with fake seizures that could only be cured by Dilaudid. Seizures aren't treated by opiates. This lady was insufferable, and she knew all the rules. She would make sure her enabling husband, IQ 50, came in so she had a driver so she could get substances. If we didn't give substances, he would shut that place down screaming and threatening. She would spy the parking lot to see which doctors were working because Dilaudid. Well, one day, I damn had it. She had brought her son, IQ normal, to the ER. He had a learner's permit, she reassured me. and she started fake seizing and screaming. I just let her go. Then she got threatening, so I called security, and I was the first person to ever get her removed. She then proceeds to walk out the doors with her son, and not 15 minutes later, she is back in the air as a trauma, full collar and all. She says she's going to sue me, that she went outside, had a seizure, fell, and is in more pain, dilaudid. So I stop her right there and walk to security around the corner and look at the security tape. She very clearly looked around, made sure no one was looking, then gently lay down in a mangled position. In the video, it looked like her son said, "Damn this," and he literally walks away and walks several miles home. I went and cleared her from her seat collar and backboard after calling police. They came and didn't do anything. She was back 2 days later. Story 33. I lost 40 pounds in 2 months in a large part because I was so flared up in pain that I had no appetite. I went to the doctor, not for pain management because I have pretty much given up on that one, but because I was concerned about the rapid weight loss and some other health issues. My doctor told me I was lying about being in so much pain because I was losing weight, and if I was really in pain, I would be gaining weight. Because when you are in pain, you eat more because eating is a painkiller. I kind of wanted to hit his head with a hammer a bunch of time while shoving a cheeseburger in his face. Story 34. Not a doctor. I'm an X-ray tech that worked in pain management for 4 years. Probably one of the most popular lines people would use is, "If you don't give me any pain meds, I'll kill myself and that'll be your fault." The doc I worked for would look them in the face and say, "Okay, you're not getting any pain meds." Somehow they never followed through on their threats. Story 35. Not a doctor, but my boyfriend's relative is one, and has a story of a man who came to her on 2 separate occasions claiming that he fell on a potato while gardening and it went up inside of him. Story 36. Obligatory, not a doctor, but I do work in a hospital. One of the nurses was telling us about a patient that came into emergency reporting with severe headaches. When asked if he took any usual medication for them, he replied with, "Dilaudid usually works." Nurse was there thinking, right. Story 37. A story from a doctor friend which I witnessed the aftermath and subsequent hospital administration. Emails about, those were almost funnier than the story. Not long out of med school in the UK on a DME, Department of Medicine for the Elderly, ward, or demented, melancholic, and easily too old to be alive to us cynics. The ward is mainly full of demented old people who are not long for this world, and care homes can't handle them anymore. My humor is dark, but as much as I poke fun, this can be a very rewarding place to work, feeling like you really made a difference to these people even if they will have forgotten about it 20 seconds after you leave. About 3 weeks into the rotation, he was on a night shift catching a very rare 20 winks in the doctor's lounge between the 4 wards he was covering, only to be woken not by a page, but by the scream of one of the healthcare assistants, HCA, from the far end of one of the wards. This scream had traveled through a good 40 m of air, turned a corner and made it through the 3 doors between him and its source. He runs in to find Mr. Smith cuddling Mr. Jones in the same bed. Not best practice, but not too out of the ordinary, but the HCA is sat shaking in the corner. Anyway, it turns out that both patients were very demented, and Mr. Smith had confused Mr. Jones for his wife, gone from his bed and straddled Mr. Jones and proceeded to do sex. He simply then fell asleep beside the man. Obviously, him and Mrs. Jones were into some stuff back in the day. The following morning, following a very ambiguous phone call to Mr. Jones' daughter, she arrives at the hospital expecting to hear some horrible news about her father, only to have this story relayed to her from my friend. When he had finished the torrid tale and apologized profusely, she simply looks him dead in the eye and simply says, "Well, at least Dad can't get pregnant." Q30 of silence and laughter from every member of staff who were quietly listening from various spots around the nurse's station, lawsuit avoided, and the best sense of humor on earth revealed. Story 38. Not a doctor, but was the patient and the doctors, thought I was faking it. Came in with abdominal pain that I could also feel in my back. Hard to take deep breaths. We have genetic pneumothorax in the family. This was what was believed might be the problem. I am also quite tall. After pain meds, everything was okay. Took x-ray of chest area, which came back negative of anything. This is when I noticed how the doctor changed his aim. Started to ask if I had been lonely lately, etc. I also heard the nurses talking about my case, calling me a pain med seeker. Went home an hour later, AMA. About a day later, things went back to normal. I figured I had strained something. I had discomfort in that same spot on and off for about a year, but never went to check it out because of my previous experience. Then about 2 months ago, I was hit with the worst pain I've ever experienced. Same spot. I was throwing up even when there was nothing to throw up. Couldn't stand, couldn't lie down, nor sit. Any position was hurting. Called 911. Was told I should call a taxi because she didn't think it was the emergency. So I did. When I got to the ER, I was told to sit and wait. While waiting, I was sitting down and I had to swing back and forth with my upper body. This, for some reason, helped. It took about 1 hour, 20 minutes before I got in and got pain meds. Tears was just pouring out because of the pain. After the substances, it all stopped except for the discomfort. SCRP test was at around the 400s. Average cold gives about 9 and a healthy individual gives 3. Doc decides to do an ultrasound. Finds out there is stones in my gallbladder. A surgery later, and turns out my gallbladder was gangrenous and had started injuring surrounding tissue. Parts of the liver was necrotic and the abdominal wall. It all got removed. Doc said if I hadn't come in that day, I would most likely not be here today. Moral of the story, stand up for yourself and listen to your body. If you won't do it, then who will? Story 39. M's here, I had a patient who was pretending to suddenly be paralyzed, very dramatic on the floor, saying she couldn't feel anything below her neck. After assessing her, we had her stand and get onto the stretcher, which she did without difficulty, despite being totally paralyzed. In the ambulance, she told me how she sometimes goes code blue, and how if she goes code blue, I must not rub her chest or cause her pain. The best way to revive her was to turn the lights low and talk softly and soothingly to her. She told me all about how she went code blue in the hospital over a dozen times last time she was admitted, and how the doctors were so scared they almost couldn't revive her. During transport, I asked her for her birth date. Her eyes fluttered shut and she didn't respond. We drove in silence for several minutes, while I worked on documenting the very detailed and unrealistic story she had been telling me. Eventually, her eyes fluttered open and her hand went to her chest. She says, "Oh, I think I went code blue there for a minute." I replied, "Nope, no worries, you didn't. You're totally fine and your vitals were pristine. You don't have to worry, you're safe. So what's your birth date?" She looked super annoyed.